Welcome to Be Well. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jonathan from Your Why, and I'm honored to bring you these conversations with leaders in the field of mindfulness. As your moderator, I come to you with 30 plus years of experience in mindfulness, wellness, and mental health. As a practitioner, a teacher, a facilitator, and a therapist. Mindfulness, I will share, is truly a way of living life. It's when we focus our attention on being present in that given moment. Naturally, there's times that our focus will drift away, but it's in remembering that we're not present that allows us to have the opportunity to choose to return. So I encourage, let's be here now. In keeping with May being Mental Health Awareness Month, today we'll be offering a conversation about mental illness, and my hope is to offer greater clarity, understanding, and to truly humanize this condition. Our topic is a clear voice on mental health, destigmatize and demystify mental illness. Today's guest is Suzette Southfox from NAMI San Diego. Hi, Suzette.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thanks for joining us. Suzette is the Director of Education for NAMI San Diego. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I encourage you throughout our conversation to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen so you can offer questions and be a part of our conversation. Also, just a reminder for the best viewing experience up in the right-hand corner, if you go to gallery view, that will allow you to have the best viewing experience of our conversation. In opening our dialogue, our conversation today, I want to offer a quote from Jon Kabat-Zinn. Look at other people and ask yourself if you're really seeing them or just your thoughts about them. I share this quote because I believe it's relevant to our conversation about mental illness and truly being able to see people of all challenges in life. Welcome, Suzette. Initially, I just want to offer you an opportunity to share what NAMI is. A lot of people may not have heard of NAMI before. If you could share just what their mission is in relation to mental illness.
Thank you, Jonathan. If you've been around San Diego for a while and you're familiar with the Hillcrest area, you might think NAMI is a sushi restaurant, which it is, but the NAMI that I work for, it's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We have affiliates all over the country, and San Diego is blessed to have the largest one. We've been around since the 70s, and we have a staff of about 100 people and about 200 to 300 volunteers. What's important to know about NAMI is we are all about educating, advocating, and supporting people and families who live with mental health challenges. So that's who we are, and that's what we do.
Thank you. I think with the pandemic, there has been a greater focus on all of our mental health. And it's interesting, I've been seeing more of Michael Phelps. Michael, the Olympic gold medalist, he's spoken often of his experience with depression. More recently, he's come out and spoke that this period of time being sheltered in place and going through the quarantine has really been one of the most difficult times in his life. And so I wonder from your experience, what you're seeing with people that are sheltering in place and what kind of challenges they may be encountering.
Sure. I really appreciate the language that you're using, which is sheltering in place. And language is incredibly important when we talk about mental health and mental illness and mental wellness. I also appreciate you bringing up Michael Phelps, because when we see people who are popular or media figures or sports figures talk honestly and openly about their own challenges, it helps to break stigma. So the first thing that I'd like to say is about language and about talking about this, which really opens every single door. We understand that to be a peer is someone who lives with a mental health challenge. To be a family member, that's someone whose loved one lives with a mental health challenge. And then you can also be a parent of a young person or maybe not so young person who lives with a mental health challenge. So the people that are engaged with NAMI all over the country have lived experience. And that is really where I come to the table with my own lived experience. I am a peer. That means I live with a mental health condition. I am a family member. If anybody knows anything about mental health, my family is kind of the DSM-5, which is the Encyclopedia of Mental Health Disorders. And I'm also a parent of a young person who lives with a couple of mental health challenges and is also on the autism spectrum. So as a peer, a family member, and a parent, I come with just a whole bushel full of lived experience. And that's the perspective that we like to take when we just engage around mental health, and being able to speak our truth. That is very powerful. And that's what you're speaking about, Michael, doing as well.
So as you share from those multiple perspectives, what do you see as being the challenge and or the opportunity now that we've been sheltering in place for some duration?
For some duration, absolutely. I think the biggest challenge is the fact that many of us are sheltering with our loved ones. And if we have any kind of mental health challenge or substance misuse challenge in the home, it can create an environment that's very tense. And depending on where people are in their journey, whether or not you're seeking support, sheltering in place, how do you do that? And how do you keep peace? How do you keep wellness going on? So what we're really seeing is not only the absence of coping skills that people have developed or people turn to, kind of their go-to skills. Those, for the most part, have been taken away because you can't really go out and be with friends or run out for a jog. You can do some of these things, but some you absolutely cannot do. And the other thing that we're noticing is not only is it the mental health community, the peers, the family members, the advocates that are living with mental health concerns, but it's everybody now. So it's a little bit of depression, a little bit of anxiety, circumstances that are enveloping, unfolding. That's where we are. So we're seeing not only challenges with how we normally cope, but we're seeing a whole lot of people experiencing the same thing that we are. So there's confusion, there's concern, there's elation that the common language is going on. There's all sorts of stuff going on.
Well, it's interesting as you know, not to put too much emphasis or go too far, but Michael Phelps was sharing why it was one of the most challenging times, or has been, is because he doesn't have his outlet. Being in the pool provided a certain outlet and a certain grounding for him. The other day, it was interesting that there's almost those that are challenged with mental illness, they see others grappling with this, and there was almost a camaraderie that you spoke to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And it's very refreshing to have tools and suggestions to help people, but then to be asked for that, because there are support groups that are online that you can attend. And if what an individual is experiencing, they don't know if they've got depression, but they're feeling really bad, or they don't know if they have, quote unquote, a diagnosis of anxiety, but they're just having a lot of trouble being worried and nervous all the time. If that's the case, we can say, check this website out. Here's the phone number to call. You might even do a self-screen. If you go over here, you can find symptoms. And we're not suggesting that people diagnose themselves, but we are suggesting there are so many resources available. So if you have a concern for yourself or a loved one, simply because we're sheltering in place and many of us are working remotely does not mean that that help is not there. It's still there.
Excellent. I remember when you and I talked the other day, you were sharing about 3 questions that you typically see in your work, and just this subtle shift that makes a huge difference in terms of perspective. So I want to give you an opportunity to bring that through.
Sure, and those are really important questions. I'm glad you brought those up. Let me just give you a little bit of a context, because we talk about, and many people hear this, that 1 in 5 will experience a mental health condition in their lifetime. That's 20%, 1 in 5. And what does that look like now? I'm not really sure what it looks like now, but I can tell you that 1 in 5 is conservative, and 1 in 5 in the United States, that's about the population of France, the
Mm.
entire country of France. And if you look at the California, the state in which we live in, if you do 1 in 5, you're talking about, oh, the population of Hong Kong. So we're talking about lots and lots of people. And I speak with NAMI and as a parent and as a peer and as a family member a lot. And the questions that I get, and they will come from teenagers, they will come from senior citizens, they will come from district attorneys, they will come from construction workers. So everybody has these same questions. The first question is, how do I get my loved one to understand they have a mental health challenge or they have a mental illness? How do I get my loved one to understand that or to admit it? That's the first question. The second question is, how do I get them to take medication? Please tell me, how do I do that? And the
Right.
third question is, how do I get my family to understand that this is actually going on, because they don't get it. They don't understand. And those questions really, as a family member, as someone who cares so deeply about the well-being of our loved ones, we need those questions answered, right? And as we were talking the other day, I've been trying to answer these questions for about 10 or 12 years, and I can give you the HOV answer, which is you can't answer them. But
Yep.
if you shift the question just a little bit, just a 1% shift, you'll not only come to a different perspective, but you may answer that question on the way. So rather than saying, how do I get my loved one to understand that they have a mental health challenge? That question should become, how much do I know about the mental health challenge I think my loved one is living with? How much do I know about that? And then you learn as much as you can. You go on YouTube, you Google, you Wikipedia, you talk to a doctor, you talk to friends, you talk to a psychologist, you talk to the pharmacy when you go to pick up medication. And if you do these things, you're going to learn a whole lot. And you may even learn about something called anosognosia. It's a fancy word. It's kind of a long word, anosognosia. And what that,
I'm
tell me,
glad
go ahead.
I'm glad you brought that through. I was going to try and share that word, but you nailed it. So I'll let you run with that.
Okay. Anosognosia. It is a condition where you do not have awareness of the condition. And it's a real thing. And about 40% of people with bipolar disorder who live with that, and about half of the people who live with schizophrenia or any schizophrenia related condition, they also have anosognosia. And that means because of the condition they live with, they can't see that they have it. So it's not that they're being difficult or challenging or mean or wrong. It's just that they're ill, and part of their illness, they can't see it. So if you learn that and you learn other things about the illness that your loved one is faced with, chances are you will learn so much more how to work with them and how to be there for them. I'm glad you brought that.
That's so important. It's just that little 1% shift in terms of perspective. When I was sharing with you the other day, I was watching this the Netflix series Ozarks.
You were sharing that, yeah.
As sheltered in place, I've been burning series, my wife and I, and it's a pretty interesting show. But one of the things that I really admire is they've woven through consistently now different representations of mental illness. There was one individual there that was really challenged with depression, and they spoke to it in a way that I hadn't really seen represented in media before. And it was talking about how being depressed, that person is fighting for their life. It's an active process. They're working at it. And often I've seen depression spoken to or represented as being kind of lazy and passive. And so that was just a wonderful representation. And now they just more recently on the show, at least the series, the episodes that I'm seeing right now, is talking about bipolar depression and representing those swings and the irritability and how volatile, as well as moving into other more sedate stages. And so I've been very impressed to see that represented in television and in the media. But I still feel like there's a ways we need to go. And I know NAMI advocates for greater education. And so I'm just wondering how you see representation of mental illness in terms of in the public forums now.
That's a great question, and I'm really glad you brought that up in terms of how we're seeing things defined and portrayed on film, in television shows, podcasts, radio, everywhere. And it has changed, and it is changing. And if you look at the language that we use, and we go back to the question of how come my loved one's not admitting that they have a mental health condition, right? We used to say someone was insane, right? How many people do you know would like to admit that they're insane?
Yeah.
Nobody. Or
Yeah.
crazy was another
Yeah.
one. And
Yeah.
now we're saying things like mental illness. I don't know a single person, and I know a lot of people who live with mental health conditions. Some of them are brilliant. I don't know anybody who would say, yeah, I'm mentally ill.
Mm.
It's the language that we use. So when we talk about challenges or a condition, we are really taking language and we're making it so much more accessible to people. And I think back when you were talking about depression and how we might say someone is lazy. When my loved one had such an acute experience of his depression, he was unable to attend school his senior year, the last 4 months. He couldn't get out of bed. What I saw at home was somebody who was incredibly depressed. I mean, maybe showered 2 or 3 times in 4 months. When we finally got back to school, the vice principal said, well, they're lazy. And
Wow.
that was like, wow, okay, we've got to disconnect, because there's a difference between being lazy and being ill, and then how you perceive that and how you express that. So understanding that a mental health condition is a biological brain disorder.
Mhm.
People sometimes they may have the predisposition for it. Sometimes there might be an environmental trigger. Sometimes there could be a number of things that could make this come to fruition. We don't really know, and it's different for everybody. But what we do know is it is an illness. And if you blame someone for their illness, it's like if you know someone who is going through chemotherapy, you're saying, wow, they have to do chemotherapy because there's something wrong with them. And then if their chemotherapy doesn't work, it's like, wow, they weren't a very good patient. We don't talk like that when somebody has a physical health challenge that we understand. When it is a mental challenge or something to do with the brain, we just don't know what to do. And I think one of the reasons is a mental health condition, it affects your perception, it affects the way you think and the way you feel. And when your perception and your thoughts and your feelings are affected, it's going to change the way you behave. That's just what we do. That's our bodies. And when people's behavior changes, we get scared because we don't know why. And unless we stop and try and figure this out, it's going to be really easy to go down the road of there's something wrong with that person, rather than what happened, not what's wrong with you, but what happened. Those are really different perspectives.
That's why I really appreciate the mission of NAMI in terms of providing education, because, as you said, we have much more compassion for someone taking on a medical condition,
Yeah.
and what their challenge and what their plight is, and still very much so we're uninformed, not educated in relation to mental illness. There's more discussion going on, and it's coming forward, which is wonderful, but we still have a ways to go. And it's interesting because you dramatize pretty well the size. I mean, 20% of the population being challenged with a mental illness at a particular point in time. You would hope that we would be more sensitized, but it's still something that's not in the forefront of conversation often. But I do see us moving along that continuum. I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about, as parents with young children, and how to recognize when a child is acting out versus whether there could be concerns related to mental illness.
That's a really good issue to bring up, and I appreciate it, because being a parent of someone who started displaying at a very, very early age behaviors that were extraordinary, but being a first-time parent, I didn't have anything to compare it with. It is so important to understand that a mental health condition can be experienced by anyone, not just grown-ups. I like to say that mental health affects people from the CEO to the custodian to the child next door. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter how old you are. And the other piece that's really important to know is the average delay or the average time it takes between someone experiencing something that's related to mental health and actually getting the help that they need. The average time is about 12 years. And
Wow.
if you look at a child who is experiencing maybe depression and they're 8 years old, and then you add 10 to 12 years, you've got an adult who lived their entire life untreated with a mental health condition. So understanding that if something is going on that's extreme or unusual, or wow, you're back here again, you're back here again, chances are there might be something going on, and asking is the best thing to do. When I realized that we had an anger problem in our house and I thought my son had an anger issue, I started trying to find like an anger class or anger counseling or some kind of help. I even worked with the school. I didn't know, and the school didn't know, that for children in particular, anger can be a sign of depression. I didn't know that. Now that I know that, things make sense. So asking for that kind of help, and it took me a while to feel like I could actually go forward, because I'll tell you what, I was afraid if I was going to label my child that would impact them for the rest of their life. And I thought, oh my gosh, could I really do that? Could I do that? Because what if the choices that they have when they get older are smaller because they have this label? And I really thought that. And I sat with it for a while, and I realized when I saw how much pain and how much suffering was going on in our house, I realized, oh my gosh, if I don't say something, then we're going to have so much problems for such a long time. It's not fair. And what will that lead to? So it was like, where do I go? And I decided the truth is, I'll do anything to help my child. I would give my hands and feet to help my child if that's what was needed. And being able to have that feeling and realizing, wow, I don't have to give my hands and feet. I just have to be willing to say, should we look at mental health? And I was willing to say that, and that led us to an amazing journey and a place where we're doing better. But I think maybe if I never said that way back when, I don't know where we'd be. I kind of went on. Sorry about that.
No, no, you helped exemplify, at least for me, that process of 12 years between when someone is challenged with a condition and actually having it diagnosed and treated. A lot of the research that I've seen as well is that it's that many years. And so look at that journey, not just the pain that goes on during that time, but the belief system that one develops about themselves. Am I ever going to get better? Is this just who I am? And attaching to things like that, that just can compound the whole process for them. So I really appreciate you bringing that through. You were sharing with me about communication and how important a tool that was. And you spoke of Xavier Amador and some of the work that he had done. If
Right.
you could share about that, please.
Sure. One of the questions that we talked about a little while ago that I get is how do I get my family to understand that our loved one has a serious mental health condition? And the answer, well, the question that you really need to be asking, and it gets to communication, is how do I communicate with my family when we're all on different pages? And the most important communication is if you're a family member and you have a loved one living with a mental health condition, whether that's a child or an adult, the most important thing for you is to be able to communicate with them, to be heard. And that's very difficult because there's a lot of feelings and there's a lot of thoughts and there's a lot of opinions. And if you're a parent like me, you know what's best, and if they would only do this, we wouldn't have this problem, right? That's
Sure.
not true, but I'm compelled to feel that, right? So to be able to communicate is to be able to hear what someone is saying and speak to them respectfully. And It sounds like it's super easy. It actually is. But when you're in the middle of it and you have feelings and you're scared, it's really hard. So there is a method, and we talk about it all the time at NAMI in our classes, our support groups. It's called the LEAP, L-E-A-P, like 8 lords a leaping. And this is a method that was created by Dr. Xavier Amador, A-M-A-D-O-R, and he actually founded the NAMI Scientific Council and the Family to Family classes, and was very instrumental early on in NAMI as an organization. He also has lived experience. His brother, who was actually older than he was and helped raise him, lived with schizophrenia. He also had a loved one who lives with bipolar disorder. He believed that his brother needed to take medication because his brother was sick, right? It was clear he lived with schizophrenia. And Xavier, as he grew up, he became interested in psychology and developed that as a career, and was very certain he knew exactly what needed to happen to make his brother well. And his brother had other thoughts. His brother said, "I'm not sick, I don't need help." And he walked out of his life for a couple years. And what Dr. Amador realized then was he's never going to win on the strength of his argument. It's kind of like the parent, I know what's best. Even though he has the argument and all of the facts, he's going to only win on the strength of his relationship. So he rethought everything, and he rethought how he was going to interact with his brother if he ever had the chance to talk to him again. And what he developed was a system where you listen to someone, you empathize with someone, you agree with someone, and you partner with them. And it doesn't mean that you're on the same page in terms of your belief system. I'll give you an example what listening actually means. If I have a young person in my life and I know them very well and they go to school, very popular, they participate in clubs. This is when we could still go to school. And this young person came to me and they were in tears because they felt like everybody at school hated them and they didn't have any friends. And they were sobbing. My response may very well be, I want to fix this, number one, and I want them to understand that's not true. People love you, right? That's not true, but that young person is not going to feel like I heard them, even though it's not true, right? I'm not listening. But if I say, wow, you're really upset because it sounds like nobody at school likes you and you're really upset. That's what I heard. That's what's happening. They're going to feel heard. I'm not telling them that's true. I'm telling them I hear what they're saying. I listen. And if I felt that, I would feel terrible. I empathize. I would absolutely feel terrible. I would probably be bawling my eyes out too. I
I like,
empathize.
yeah, I like what you said, because that's a beneficial method for any relationship, couples and all. You're validating their experience so they feel heard and understood, and then
Yeah,
it allows for movement in the communication from there.
yeah,
I have a couple of questions to pose to you. One was,
sure.
and it's a little bit of a nuance from where we were. What if your child is challenged with a mental illness? How do you educate those that are around that child, whether teachers, coaches, and having them effectively understand your child?
Oh, that's such a good question. When I first realized that my young person was dealing with a mental health condition, the first thing I did was I gathered everything that I could about it. Like I took resources, I made Xerox copies, I printed things off, and I put them in a binder, and I made 5 binders. And I gave one to the principal, one to his teacher, one to the counselor, one to his doctor, and I kept one at home. So I learned as much as I could and I shared the information. That's the place that I was at. Not everybody can do that, but you can find support for parents who are dealing with this, and they will give you tips and tricks and suggestions on how to share. And the best thing that I can say is if you really understand mental health and mental illness as being a biological brain condition, it is much easier to talk about because there's a lot of stigma and people can feel embarrassed or they can feel reluctant to share.
One last question. I know our time's gone quickly. I want to allow you the opportunity to respond to it. Often we ask someone, how are you feeling? And if someone responds authentically that they're challenged with some mental illness, how, as a friend, partner, how best to respond? What do you recommend? How do we meet that? How do we be there for that person and supporting them?
Listen. If you just listen and sit on your hands for wanting to fix it, because what happens is we feel so strongly we want to fix things that we're not listening to people. And an example would be somebody saying, I'm having so much trouble with this isolation. I'm feeling so incredibly down. If you say, why don't you go for a run? Have you tried to, how's your eating? Are you getting enough sleep? You're giving them answers. You're not listening. But if I say, wow, I really hear that you're down. I'm glad that you're sharing that with me. I don't know what to do, but I'll listen. That means so much more.
That's excellent. Suzette, what can you share about resources that are available at NAMI San Diego, just to give a highlight to that?
Best place to go would be the calendar on our website. We are running 11 to 12 support groups online, and they're free. We also have classes online that are free, and we have a parent support group for parents that have young people with a behavioral health challenge. Don't need a diagnosis, you just need to have a concern. So anything you can get to through our website, and then NAMI National, which is nami.org. You can find tons of resources and information about various conditions.
So the key takeaway I come with from our time together in this conversation is really just to make it authentically human, to create a shared experience in being there for somebody. Suzette, really appreciate your offering. Thank you for being in this conversation with me. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being with us, and join us again next time. And until then, please be well. Thank you very much.